Hi gang, the Minotaurs chapter of Space Marines are something of an enigma in the universe of Warhammer 40k. Outwardly, they're a swift and uncompromising force, defending the Imperium, increasingly active in the 41st millennium and willing to respond to Imperial decree and orders in a way few other chapters are. But the closer you look into that, the more things don't add up. Hey, we've got merch, you can buy it or something. Links are all in the thing below. The Minotaurs are a brutal and unforgiving Space Marine chapter, a rapid reaction force that has ostensibly protected the Imperium since the 36th millennium, masters of shock assault and more than willing to test their skills against renegade Space Marine chapters. Yet they're a deeply fractious and aloof entity, staunch defenders of humanity who are nonetheless intensely disliked by everyone they fight alongside. And their origins are shrouded in mystery, with conflicting records and an unsettlingly direct link to the highest echelons of Imperial authority. The early history of the Minotaurs is enigmatic, with Imperial records proving either difficult to access, lost, or deliberately withheld. Some fragmentary accounts suggest a chapter bearing the name Minotaurs was active as early as M32, participating in the suppression of the Solar Rebellion alongside other Astartes chapters. However, these records are contested, with other, more widely accepted Imperial histories asserting that the Minotaurs were not fully founded until the 21st founding in M36. The 21st founding, notoriously known as the Cursed Founding, saw the creation of numerous Space Marine chapters, many of whom were plagued in later years by genetic idiosyncrasies or just outright mutations. While the Minotaurs chapter reportedly avoided the overt mutation that afflicted some of their brethren from the founding, their gene seed was officially listed as chimeric, a suspicious designation that hinted at some sort of hidden tampering. During their initial period of operation between M36 and M38, these early Minotaurs rapidly cultivated a reputation as berserkers. They were a fleet-based chapter, renowned for their swift response to distress calls from embattled Imperial worlds. However, that intervention often came with a very heavy cost to any strategic cohesion. They were fiercely autonomous, known for ignoring established command structures and battle plans, preferring instead to plunge headlong into combat with zeal, their sole objective the utter destruction of their enemy. All their assaults were characterized by an almost barbaric desire to engage in close quarters combat as quickly as possible, smashing through enemy lines without regard for reconnaissance, intelligence, or even their own casualties. Once satisfied, they would withdraw as abruptly as they'd arrived, often leaving confused Imperial forces in their wake. This unpredictable and very uncooperative nature earned them a dark reputation, making them unreliable allies, and their laxity in submitting their gene seed tithe, combined with the growing anxieties surrounding the Cursed Founding, led to them being largely shunned by the mainstream Imperial military. Then, sometime in M38, the Minotaurs simply vanished from Imperial records. They wouldn't reappear again until over 2 millennia later, at the dawn of M41, during the tumultuous Makarian heresy, and the deployment of the chapter to that war was observed with considerable interest and concern by the Departamento Minotaurum. The chapter that had returned bore the name Minotaurs, but their behaviour, structure, and even appearance exhibited significant discrepancies when compared to the Imperial records that existed from before. The Makarian heresy was an immense civil war that erupted across the vast territories conquered by Lord Solar Macarius after his death. His 7 army group's generals, abandoning their oaths, carved up these newly won worlds on the far western rim into warring empires. And to quell the conflict, the High Lords of Terror deployed numerous Space Marine chapters. The Minotaurs of M41, unlike their M36 predecessors, demonstrated a surprising willingness to operate in concert with larger Imperial battle plans, albeit still maintaining a noticeable distance. They also arrived as a fully armed and newly equipped chapter, deploying a formidable dozen strike cruisers during the campaign, an unusually large show of force from a supposedly long-missing chapter. This apparent wealth of high-quality war material was linked by some observers to their slavish and unquestioning obedience to any directives that had been issued directly by the High Lords of Terror, bypassing all other levels of Imperial command. Their actions in the Makarian heresy were brutally efficient, particularly in suppressing rogue Imperial forces. They shattered the petty empire of Colonel Lyrias on Syros Prime, annihilating the rebel 11th Cardu Armoured Corps. They enacted exterminatus on rebel planets, wiping out entire populations on Duval and across the Hope Cluster, and most infamously, they showed no compunction in turning their wrath against other Adeptus Astartes. On the ocean world of Nereus, they hunted down and then destroyed the Xenos-possessed 4th Company of the Imperial Paladins, poisoning the world in the process, and their intervention in a conflict between the Doom Warriors and the Inceptors chapters, known as the Euxine Incident, saw the Inceptors almost completely eradicated, reduced from fighting strength to a mere 100 survivors, with their valuable relics and flagships seized by the Minotaurs as spoils of war. This extreme action, apparently on orders from the High Lords, sparked widespread outrage amongst other Space Marine chapters, leading to the Ultramarines, who were the Inceptors' primogenitors, to outright refuse to fight alongside the Minotaurs anymore, branding their actions a massive and dishonourable overreaction. This disdain was further fueled by the Minotaurs' public insults towards Marneus Calgar and their deliberate provocation of the Genesis chapter during the 14th Siege of Antagonis. And since that reappearance in M41, the Minotaurs have become increasingly active, having been deployed against renegade chapters multiple times. But what precisely caused their dramatic shift in behaviour, or indeed if the M41 Minotaurs are the same chapter that vanished from records 2,000 years before, remains a closely guarded secret. The Minotaurs chapter of the 41st millennium present a complex paradox. Superficially, they operate with a degree of codex compliance, yet their practices reveal unusual and often brutal deviations. They're notable for their preference for deploying in complete chapter strength wherever possible, issuing small-scale campaigns in favour of decisive, overwhelming force. That strategy, combined with their ability to replace losses of both material and personnel with startling ease, means the chapter is almost always maintained at full strength, around 1,000 Space Marines. Their recruitment and indoctrination process is also remarkably swift, relying heavily on hypno-indoctrination and neurocerebral surgery to rapidly transition neophytes into full Astartes. This psycho-conditioning is then rigorously monitored and regularly refreshed in veteran Marines by the chapter's apothecaries to a level that, while not against any rules per se, it's considered particularly extreme amongst Space Marine chapters. From a purely technical standpoint, the chapter is very well equipped, boasting an armoury that is the envy of many others. They possess extensive stocks of Mark III power armour and the modern Mark VIII variety. Their first company is notably well equipped with Terminator armour, including rare and highly valuable patterns such as the Tartaros and Arcanac marks, relics from the Horus Heresy era, and beyond personal war gear, their motor pool is formidable, including Storm Eagle gunships and heavy Spartan assault tanks, helped by their tendency to seize any relic equipment from their defeated foes. The Minotaurs also field an unusually high number of Contemptor pattern dreadnoughts, a very rare and hard to maintain pattern from the Heresy, with at least 10 active in some recent campaigns. These venerable war machines are addressed with the ominous title Hecaton, a Terran word thought to mean giant or enslaved monster. And unlike the customary reverence shown to dreadnoughts by other chapters, the Minotaurs treat their Hecaton with a cold indifference, almost uncomfortable around them. The chapter is still fleet-based, their fortress monastery and mobile operation base being the ancient heavy assault carrier, the Daedalus Crater. Within the maze-like chambers of the ship lies the brazen throne of the chapter master, Asterion Moloch, a figure of extremely dark legend. Bloody-handed and intensely paranoid, Moloch is known as a diligent and disciplined strategist and master of siegecraft. A veteran of countless battles, his body is heavily rebuilt with cybernetic augments, and he has personally accounted for the demise of several other Space Marine chapter masters. He's also been reported killed in action at least 7 times over the last 5 centuries, leading to widespread speculation that Asterion Moloch is not a single individual, but rather a legacy inherited by successive chapter masters, or perhaps even an engrammatically enforced personality. The Minotaur's colours are bronze with red detailing, and their chapter icon is the stylized bull's head. And while the bull's head has remained their symbol since as long as records exist, scholars have noted significant differences in this heraldry and the markings they have between M36 and M38. While their M36 iteration was well known for their uncontrolled berserker assaults, the M41 Minotaurs display a more controlled and strategic combat doctrine. While they're still merciless and relentless, they're no longer blindly impetuous. They excel at siegecraft, attrition warfare, and combating monstrous enemies with sheer weight of numbers, and their response to distress calls is now much more selective. They respond quickly when they choose to, but are noted to respond more often to emergencies involving other Astartes chapters, as if to continually prove their prowess against them. This selective engagement, coupled with their extreme security protocols that border on paranoia, makes them deeply distrustful of most other Imperial servants. The genetic origins of the Minotaurs remain one of their most profound secrets. Though those records from the Curse founding indicate some sort of corrupted gene seed, the current Minotaurs show no overt tendencies towards the wild berserker rages of their supposed predecessors. And though nowadays they regularly submit gene seed tithes like a good Astartes chapter, all information regarding their genetic lineage is classified under the highest levels of authority, with even agents of the Inquisition reportedly having been murdered for delving too deeply. That classified gene seed, combined with their incredible material wealth and Moloch's ambiguous identity, points to the Minotaur's most suspicious characteristic, their direct and unquestioning ties to the High Lords of Terror. Since their reappearance, the chapter has repeatedly demonstrated a complete disdain for orders issued by any authority save the High Lords, particularly by the Master of the Administratum. Time and again, they've acted as the direct instrument of the Administratum, intervening in civil conflicts and brutally quelling internal strife. This blatant circumvention of the normal Imperial command structure, placing an Astartes chapter apparently directly under the thumb of the Adeptus Terra, has fostered an incredible hostility from other Space Marine chapters eager to retain their independence. And that isn't helped by the temperament of the individual Minotaurs. Their brooding, malign, and intensely paranoid demeanour does little to foster positive relationships. The chapter exhibits little respect for anyone or anything beyond the sacred authority of the God Emperor and the High Lords, offering no deference or civility to any other Imperial institution, and their disposition is often seen as a seething, barely restrained malice, an aura that suggests they're perpetually on the verge of terrible anger, held tightly in check. That belligerence manifests in their interactions with other Space Marines, whom they seem to actively provoke, deliberately baiting them into duels or confrontations. It may be that this aggressive and antagonistic disposition is a direct result of their extensive and continuous psycho-indoctrination, but it also raises a worrying question. Does this extensive indoctrination actively instill this belligerence, or is it there as a constant, desperate measure to restrain a deeper genetic flaw, perhaps that lingering berserker tendency from the cursed founding? Since their reappearance, the Minotaurs have maintained a relentless pace of deployment, often appearing at the Imperium's most brutal flashpoints. One notable early engagement after their reappearance was the Siege of Casobon in 760 M41. The Minotaurs were amongst the first Imperial forces to respond to a devastating word-bearer assault on the hives of the planet of Hermetica. Their arrival was characteristic. Blasting into range, they immediately launched an all-out orbital bombardment on the word-bearer's command post within the central basilica of Hive Kassobon, heedless of the immense collateral damage to the civilian population and infrastructure. Following this strike, the Minotaurs then deployed to the surface, assaulting every enemy strongpoint with overwhelming force and ignoring the legions of fleeing civilians who had nowhere else to escape. In the chaos, Chapter Master Moloch himself engaged and slaughtered the possessed bodyguard of the Dark Apostle Layak, the word-bearer's commander, though Layak ultimately escaped through a warp portal. Once that objective was achieved and the enemy leadership removed, the Minotaurs then withdrew, leaving the leaderless Chaos Horde to be mopped up by local Imperial Guard forces. The Badab War was also one of their more infamous engagements. In 907 M41, at the request of the Legate Inquisitor Frayne, the chapter answered the call to the Maelstrom Zone, joining a new wave of loyalist reinforcements. By this point, the war had been escalating for years, and several Space Marine chapters had been forced to retire from the conflict, their places filled by new chapters known for their savage nature or their dedication to punishing renegade Astartes. The Minotaurs committed their entire chapter strength to the campaign, 10 companies and 11 capital ships, under the joint command of Asterion Moloch and the Reclusiarch Ivanus Enkomi, and operating from their flagship, the Daedalus Crater. While broadly coordinating with Loyalist Command, the Minotaurs largely operated as an independent raiding and harassment force in the southern Maelstrom Zone. Their initial actions involved striking a series of targets within the industrial heartland of the Pale Stars, leaving no survivors in their wake, and they were considered the preeminent close combat and shock assault troops in the war until the arrival on the Loyalist side of the Karkarodons. Their most lauded, or perhaps reviled achievement during the Badab War was the complete defeat and forced surrender of the Lamenter's secessionist chapter. Again, the Minotaurs pursued the Lamenters across the Maelstrom Zone, eventually cornering them at the Optera system. Minotaurs' outriders swiftly crippled the Lamenters' chapter bark, leaving it vulnerable as the full strength of the chapter arrived. What followed was a vicious 17-hour battle of relentless boarding actions and close-quarters combat, and when the fighting ceased, only 300 Lamenters remained, their chapter utterly broken, forced to surrender to the judgment of the High Lords. Despite suffering significant casualties themselves, the Minotaurs then continued to fight on in the campaign, spending the rest of the war on interdiction duties in the space lanes and carrying out punitive actions against previously rebel worlds. Their expertise in siegecraft proved invaluable during the final assault on Badab, and elements of the chapter even attempted to chase down the now twice renegade executioners. The Minotaurs eventually departed the Maelstrom Zone in 913 M41, taking a number of seized Lamenter's ships with them. Between 989 and 992 M41, forces from the chapter aided in the early stages of the retaking of Rin's world from an entrenched Orc army, and around the same time, they participated in the harrowing of the excommunicated Night Reapers chapter, fighting alongside the Red Templars and the Grey Knights. The campaign culminated in the disastrous Perrin Cross incident, where the entire combined strike force of Grey Knights and Minotaurs were annihilated when the giant Perrin Cross construct was deliberately destroyed. During the event, Asterion Moloch was once again reported killed in action, only to be recovered alive and returned to battle soon after. And the entire chapter were then deployed in the Orphean War in 992, a conflict against the Necron Minarch dynasty, their largest engagement in which was the Amara Void Battle, where the chapter launched teleport strikes directly into the heart of the Necron vessel Dead Hand. Moloch again led the assault force and confronted the Necron Overlord, though he was badly wounded and vented into space, again reported as killed in action, before being miraculously recovered. Despite their efforts, the Orphean War proved too costly. Following the failure of the Imperial defence and the withdrawal, the Orpheus sector was formally disbanded, and by decree of the High Lords of Terror, the Minotaurs were charged with the purging of the sector through widespread exterminatus. And more recently, in early M42, during the Age of the Dark Imperium, the Minotaurs found themselves embroiled in one of their most controversial assignments, the Hexarchy Rebellion on Terra. The Hexarchy was a group of current and ex-High Lords who opposed Robute Guilliman's reforms in the early years of the Indomitus Crusade. The Daedalus Crater initially hove into orbit above Terra under the pretense of assisting in peacekeeping duties shortly after the spread of the Great Rift, but the Minotaurs quickly came to blows with both the Imperial Fists and the Adeptus Custodes when it was revealed that they were acting on the orders of the former Master of the Administratum under the impression that Terra was being corrupted from within. It was only when the former master was assassinated and his successor ordered the chapter to stand down that their operations ceased. And in that same period, the chapter also suffered from a surprise assault by the 7th Company of the Death Guard. While the traitor Marines were forced to fall back, the Minotaurs' gene stocks were irrevocably tainted, leading to them being fully resupplied from tithed gene seed stores on Terra, which of course meant that they were one of the first chapters to receive Primaris upgrades, which is convenient. In the current age, the Minotaurs chapter remains a dangerous mystery. Whether they are the same chapter that mysteriously vanished from Imperial records in M38, or one secretly forged anew from a disparate origin, remains a closely guarded secret. Their direct control by the Administratum, while seemingly providing them with unparalleled resources, is profoundly unusual and deeply suspicious in an Imperium where the autonomy of the Astartes is considered sacrosanct, and the role of their psycho-indoctrination further complicates that. Is it there to enforce their already impressive discipline, or is it a necessary mechanism to suppress an inherent unstable flaw? The true nature of the Minotaurs remains very, very dark and murky indeed. And that's the chapter. The Minotaurs are a fun idea that has had a fair amount of conversation over the years, mostly due to the conflicting reports on their origins. Of course, the chapter, like many other Bad Ab chapters, debuted in 1989 as part of the very first Bad Ab War article. The Minotaurs were listed and depicted here by Gary Chalk in a red and yellow scheme, and then, like many of the other chapters here, they basically disappeared for 20 years, until Alan Bly wrote the Forge World Bad Ab War series in 2010, which is where most of the lore here comes from. After this, for a while, a bit like the Red Scorpions, they became one of the special Forge World chapters, with resin character models for Asterion Moloch and Ivanis Incomi, conversion kits, and then popping up in other Forge World publications like the Fall of Orpheus campaign, making them a lot more of a popular and well-known chapter than many other of these Bad Ab War chapters. However, most of the reason they're talked about so much is due to their conflicting roots. The lore in this video is pretty much everything published to date about their origins. They're deliberately shady and mysterious. But Edwin Brown, a playtester for those Bad Ab War books back in 2010, had a slightly different story. In a post from about a decade ago, he says that during the development of that campaign, him and Alan Bly came up with a secret backstory, and that their intention was to make them secret Iron Warriors descendants, one of the very few chapters actually listed to be from traitor gene seed. Seriously, anytime I mention that a chapter has lost origins, you can guarantee a load of comments claiming they definitely must be traitors, but it's actually extremely rare in the lore. On one hand, that does make some sense. They're noted as being very good at siegecraft, though that's not really a gene seed thing, and they can replace losses very easily, which was something that was put into the Iron Warriors lore a few years later when the Horus Heresy books were released. Brown says that this is all very, very clear if you read between the lines. The Berserker Minotaurs were a different chapter entirely, and the new ones are secret Iron Warriors descendants controlled by the Administratum. However, while that may have been a conversation, I'm not sure how much of that has really made it into these books. You can certainly read it that way, but there are also loads of other details. Their role as a rapid reaction force, the heavy implication that they still are the Berserkers just with tons of psycho-conditioning to suppress it, and the fact that a lot of the Iron Warriors connections didn't actually get written till years later, which suggests it's a bit less cut and dry than that. Either that was the idea at the time and it's all intended to be there if you read between the lines, or that was an idea during playtesting but didn't really make it into the final cut. Personally, I prefer the second one, the one where they are the original chapter just forced into compliance via psycho-conditioning, because I think that's actually a bit more interesting and grimdark than secret traitor gene seed stories. But yeah, could be either. Also, the more I do of these, the more you realise that aloof arseholes who kill civilians and everyone hates working with them seems to be about half of all Space Marine chapters. I could reuse about half this script, change all the pictures, and it would work for a surprising amount of other chapters. Maybe that's what I'll do next week. You'll have to wait until then to find out. Until then, thanks for watching. And if you'd like to find out more about the Space Marine chapters of the 41st Millennium, there's probably another video popping up there to the right. And if you'd like to support the channel, we have merch, we have a second channel, we have the usual membership schemes, and of course you can like and subscribe. See ya!